pretty good, right? So today we're going to talk about curbing your cravings, 10 ways to kick the crunchy food habit. I actually have more than 10, so this episode might actually go into next week. So this might be part 1 of 2. But anyway, let's get started because I have so much to share. So back in the 80s, there was a commercial for Lay's potato chips. And the tagline was, "Bet you can't eat just one." So just about everyone knows what it feels like to pick up a bag of chips, intending to just have a couple, just have a few, maybe a little handful. And before you know it, the whole bag is gone. And if you think the explanation is, well, if it's willpower, if you can't just eat one, then think again. And by the way, hi, Renee. Hi, I see you on Instagram. Nice to see you. Thank you, everyone else who's joining me on Instagram. If you have a comment during the show, please feel free to just leave it. Just drop a comment. If you're listening live on Voice America, I hope you enjoyed the show. And if you're listening later, same. Okay. So today I am going to talk about both the science and the psychology behind crunchy food and how this relates to emotional eating and binge eating disorder as well. All right, so for 30 years, the New England Journal of Medicine followed nearly 121,000 people, and they tracked how much they ate and how much they weighed. And the participants who gained the most weight in those 30 years were people who ate, drum roll, potato chips. So what is it about chips that make them so irresistible? Potato chips, tortilla chips, all the similar kind of snacks, Doritos, they are high in fat and carbohydrates. And some researchers believe that we have a hard time resisting chips because the combination of fat and carbs just lights up the reward system in our center of our brains and makes us want them more. If you're having problems on Instagram, is anyone else having problems on Instagram hearing this? Maybe it might be just your it just might be yours. If you don't get to see the show, don't worry. You can listen later on Voice America or on any podcast channel. So not to worry. And I hope that works out technically. Okay. So researchers say, hey, some researchers, big caveat there. Some researchers say, hey, it lights up the reward centers of our brains, and that's what makes us want them more, which is basically the concept behind the theory of food addiction, which says, since food lights up the pleasure centers of our brains, just like drugs do, those foods could be as addictive as drugs. But hold on a minute. Hold on. Let's think about this. Yes, food absolutely activates the pleasure centers in our brains. But guess what? So does laughing. So does holding your baby, listening to music. Basically anything else that brings you joy. In fact, there was a study that showed listening to classical music lit up the pleasure centers of people's brains as much as doing cocaine. So there you go. So anything that brings you joy basically lights up those same pleasure centers in your brain. But I don't think anyone has accused you of it being addicted to laughter. Oh my God, you're just laughing too much. You can't stop laughing. What's wrong with you? Of course not. Because laughing, unlike gaining weight, isn't stigmatized in our society. And let's not forget this. This is super important. Food is supposed to be pleasurable. Of course, it lights up the pleasure centers of our brains. That's what keeps us alive and well. Our brains are wired to find pleasure in eating. That's a good thing. And as far as the food addiction research shows, it will often say, yeah, but of all foods, like foods that are high in salt and fat, they activate our pleasure centers more intensely than other foods. Well, we also know that deprivation makes the pleasure response even stronger. So if you are constantly dieting, and let's face it, many of us are in this diet-obsessed diet culture, you are going to have a more intense reaction in your brain to those foods. And food addiction research does not take this deprivation factor into account. So we are not physically addicted to potato chips or anything else, but dieting can make us feel as if we are. So I also want to share, speaking of taste, here's an interesting fact. We usually associate taste buds with our mouths, right? Obviously. But did you know you also have taste receptors in your stomach, in your small intestines? The taste buds on our tongues are associated with the part of our brains that perceive taste. But it is the taste buds in our stomach. This is the cool part, is the taste buds in our stomach that activate the part of our brains that tell us when we're full. Dr. Anthony Sclafani, he is a behavioral neuroscientist. He studies how our stomachs sense nutrients. Talk about a niche, however you want to say it. Wow, that is really specific. Okay, so he says we don't normally think of the mouth as part of the gastrointestinal tract, but it is the very beginning of that long continuous tube. And it is not surprising that the receptors in our mouth are also found in the gut. So our taste receptors register when we have food in our stomach, which signals our brains to increase the production of certain hormones. I'm going to get a little in the weeds, but then I'm going to make it make sense, hopefully. So it stimulates the part of our brains that makes hormones that help us process that food. And those hormones help us realize when we are full. So there's ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone. I'm not going to get into that, but I will say that dieting causes you to have an increase in ghrelin. That's how you say it. So your body doesn't know you're trying to lose weight to look really good in that really cute outfit, or to, do better in the gym, or whatever it is you're losing weight for. Your body is trying to protect you from starving, so it automatically stimulates your appetite. But another hormone related to appetite is leptin, and that regulates our appetite and food intake. So when we have high levels of leptin, our brain gets a signal that we're full. So we want levels to be high. That's when we know we're full. We stop eating. Lower levels make us still feel hungry. And studies have shown that chronic sleep deprivation is associated with lower levels of leptin and higher levels of ghrelin. So therefore, one strategy to stop eating too many chips, pretzels, or other crunchy, salty snacks. Personally, I love Doritos. Of all of them, Doritos are my favorite. But now they kind of taste like chemicals to me, but whatever. I used to love Doritos. So one way to deal with the hormonal aspect of this, remember, we're just talking about the science, not the psychology, is to get more sleep. You get more sleep, you have higher levels of leptin that tell you when you're full, and lower levels of ghrelin, which tell you that you're hungry. Another ingredient in chips that contributes to continual snacking is a mystery culprit, but really not so mysterious. Salt. Good old salt. It's a natural mineral made out of sodium and chlorine. Salt. It has been linked to weight gain for two reasons. One is dehydration, believe it or not. We often think we're hungry when we're really thirsty. So if you feel a craving for salty potato chips, you may just need a glass of water. Try it out. Again, this is the science, not the psychology. And why is this? This is because if you get dehydrated, the level of fluids in your body is too low. Your body craves salt, which is nature's way of making you drink more fluids. You crave salt because you need water. So instead of reaching for the chips, have the water. Try having a nice big cold glass of water, or room temperature, my preference, and see what happens. That urge for salty chips, it might just disappear. And if that doesn't work, then just try a healthier option like seaweed, which has a lot of health benefits. I'm just going to look also. I'm going to skip ahead because there are other reasons why people crave salty foods having to do with salt. There has been a study that says high sodium intake may be a risk factor for weight gain independent of calorie intake. That's interesting. All right, I'm going to skip ahead though, because salt also appears to impact the hormonal mechanisms that let us know that we're full, ghrelin. That in turn can make us eat more food. So if high fat and high salt foods inhibit the ability of our bodies to know when we're full, it makes sense that we can eat a whole bag of chips without registering how much we've actually eaten, right? And here's something totally different. I had no idea about this. I never heard this before. And I just did a play on words because here's what I'm going to say. Our other senses are actually involved when it comes to craving salty, crunchy foods. And that reason has to do with sound. Researchers, science tells us that another reason potato chips feel so addictive, it has to do with the way they sound. Amazing, right? Let me tell you more. So ever notice how commercials, they're always promoting crunchiness? And if you look at the next time you're in the grocery store, look at the label. Chips are advertised as super crunchy, extra crunchy, 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 crunchy. And that's because we have certain positive associations with foods that are at a certain level of crispness. So, like, think about the last time you bit into a stale chip, right? Ew, yuck. You didn't want it anymore. It's like, bleh, stale, yuck, gross, right? Because when it's not as crunchy, that chip is just not as appealing. In fact, a few decades ago, potato chip companies developed a machine to measure the level of crunch that consumers hear in their heads when eating chips. Crazy, right? So they discovered through this machine the optimal level of crunch that people prefer, the perfect level of crunch, that's just right level of crunch, and then they manufactured chips to match those crunch levels. There's an Oxford University professor, Richard Stevenson. He studies the psychology of flavor. Again, very specific, this research, the psychology of flavor. And Dr. Stevenson says crispness is an essential quality of flavor. That crunchy sound that chips make when we chew crunchy food, it is a scientifically proven part of their appeal. Why is that? Well, that goes back 60 million years or whatever, when humans were evolving from other primates and they ate a lot of insects. The crispier the insects, the more nutrition it provided. What? It's true. They have done studies on this. So way back in caveman days, our ancestors were eating insects and we knew, hey, that really crunchy insect, that has more nutrients. That's going to help us stay alive. And that's how we came to prefer crunch. And nowadays, it's not just 60 million years ago. Nowadays, we judge foods like apples or celery or lettuce or grapes, even grapes, by their crunchiness. So the louder the crunch, and this is true, normally the louder the crunch, the more vitamins and nutrients are retained in those foods. Kind of cool, right? Am I the only one who thinks this is interesting? I think it's so interesting. Okay. So of course, potato chips are not chock full of either vitamins or nutrients, but with chips, so it's about the crunch. We associate it with good things, even though they might not be actually chock full of good things. And also the latest techniques from the field of cognitive neuroscience are revolutionizing our understanding of just how important what we hear is to our experience of eating and drinking. So sound as well as taste, as you can see, is very essential to the appeal of potato chips. Also, switching gears a little, just in regard to food, You may crave salty, crunchy foods if you eat too many soft, smooth foods. So if you're living on smoothies and Greek yogurt and vegetable soup, try changing things up a little bit, add a variety of textures to your diet. Dr. Joseph Colella, who I won't give anyway, MD, he confirms, he studies this, that when you've been eating too many mushy, soft foods, your salivary glands and the muscles in your jaw get bored, essentially. They get bored. And that's when you crave crunchy foods. We really do need balance. So as you can see, there are many neuroscientific reasons why you can't stop eating chips. And I shared some of the more unusual ones that I found in my research. You know, sound definitely was a surprise to me when I was doing this research, and it makes sense, right? Given the history that I just shared. So our physiology definitely influences our food choices. But our brains and our gastrointestinal tracts are only part of the story. Remember, our brains are the control center of our bodies, but we also have minds, which influence our thoughts, our beliefs, our feelings, our behavior, so much more than our brains. By the way, people often tell me that they're addicted to sugar, which is a whole other show, and I'm going to do a show on that, on chocolate, and I'm going to do a show on all of it. But anyway, one thing they'll say, I am addicted to sugar. And I say, oh, really? Well, when's the last time you just took spoonfuls of sugar out of the sugar bowl and just ate them? Never. That's gross. No, I eat cookies and cakes and ice cream and yeah, right. If we're really addicted to the thing, we would be eating it just straight out of the sugar bowl, but we're not. We have minds. Something else is going on. So that's why it's really important to look at the psychology of crunchy foods. And I'm going to talk about psychology from like more of a 40,000 feet up in the air, looking down at like what most people are dealing with. And then I'm going to talk about, if we have time, if not, I'm going to talk about next week, how this influences emotional eating and binge eating, specifically with specific examples of people who really felt like they were addicted to chips. And there was just, it turned out something else was going on. So stay tuned, either today or next week. I'm going to get to that. It's really interesting. But first, let's just talk about an overview of the psychology of crunchy foods. So there is a connection between feeling certain emotions, especially anger, and reaching for crunchy, salty foods, like potato chips, crunchy foods. If you're familiar with my food mood formula, what do I associate crunchy foods? Anything with a crunch, anything that makes you bite down hard, that is associated with feelings of anger. And anger can be annoyance, frustration, irritation, rage, right? Anger encompasses a lot of different levels of that emotion, from the more benign, like annoyed, to the really intense, like enraged. And there is actually science behind this. There is an emerging science called, a field called psychophysiology. Psychophysiology, and that refers to this to the way the study of looking at how our minds and bodies interact. So from a psychophysiological perspective, boy, I say that 2 times fast. I can't even say it 1 time fast. That's hard to say. From a psychophysiological perspective, chewing and crunching are natural outlets for inborn aggression, anger, aggression. Dr. Alan Hirsch, he is a neurologist and a psychiatrist, and he is founder of the Smell and Taste Treatment and Research Foundation in Chicago. He also notes the connection between crunchiness and aggression. He says, when you bite into potato chips, you're sublimating that in a healthy way. Now, what is sublimating? It is a defense mechanism in which something you find socially unacceptable, such as expressing anger, especially if you're a woman, because what are we told? That's not nice. You're not angry. That's why so many women, when they're angry, they cry. Or I'm not an angry person. Yeah, you're a person who's angry. You get to be angry. It's not a character flaw. But women are socialized to think, oh, no, 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 I'm not angry. I can't be angry. That's not nice. So what happens is they eat crunchy foods and then they get, or whatever, and then they get mad at themselves for what they ate or what they weigh. Back to sublimation. It's taking something you think is unacceptable and turning it into something acceptable. So imagine being angry at your boss because your boss yelled at you for some minor thing, got in trouble. And instead of speaking up for yourself in, say, a biting tone, you bite down on tortilla chips. Right? So it's basically displacement. Or some people say that surgeons have like their aggression. They just want to like cut into people, but they become surgeons, in which case, they're not stabbing people. They're healing people by cutting into them. I'm not saying all surgeons do this, but there have been studies that show that there is some form of people who do surgery that might be more aggressive than other people. Just saying, it doesn't apply to everybody. I don't need to get the emails about that and how your cousin or your husband and your wife is a surgeon and so sweet would never hurt a fly. Okay. So Dr. Hirsch has also studied the connection between personality and food cravings. And he finds this. Remember, this is all the guy studies, right? This is what he finds. People who love potato chips are competitive, he says. He says they're ambitious and they enjoy rewards in both business and pleasure. He also finds that chip lovers are easily frustrated at life's inconveniences, such as rush hour traffic or long lines at the checkout. He says whether they're in Disneyland, the DMV, or behind the wheel, they tend to always be in a rush. Interesting. A second personality characteristic common to people who like crunchy foods is perfectionism. And this may not be all bad, although remember, real people are not perfect and perfect people aren't real. And there's no such thing as perfection when it comes to being a person. But people who are perfectionists are often very focused, hardworking, energetic. He says they're often punctual, excited by challenges. He says pretzel lovers are often the life of the party. That's what he says. And they are lively, enthusiastic, and fun. So these are some of the characteristics of people who tend to be drawn to crunchy foods. Now, by the way, whether this pertains to you or not, here's the thing. Early in our lives, biting is a common way of expressing aggression. Babies and toddlers often feel frustrated, angry, irritated, annoyed, enraged, but they lack the language to express themselves. So what do? What's their solution? They chomp down, they bite you as a way of saying, hey, I'm upset. I am not happy. I'm mad. Although we eventually learn to talk about how we feel, most of us, and to communicate in words, biting is associated with aggression throughout our lives, just in different ways. So think of the words we use, the language we use to describe when someone is upset. Again, going back to the boss that's upset with us, we might say, oh, my boss bit my head off. Right? Bit my head off. We might describe someone else's aggression to us as biting, as harsh. We say someone who's like holding back anger. They have a clenched jaw. They're holding back their aggression, their anger. Another researcher who is both a nutritionist and a researcher, Keith Cantor, he's examined the connection between personality and food choices as well. And his findings show that people drawn to salty foods are competitive. He says they're ambitious and enjoy rewards in both business and pleasure, which goes back to the other researcher. So this research has been confirmed. And then Dr. Jianxi Chen, I hope I did not butcher his name. He is a Chinese scientist whose area of expertise is studying oral physiology and psychophysics. What is that? Psychophysics is a branch of psychology that examines the relationship between physical stimuli and resulting sensations and mental states. So the connection between, what's going on in your world and what you're feeling and what you're doing with food. And he says humans have a destructive nature that is genetic. Says humans have a strange way of releasing stress, punching, kicking, smashing, or other forms of destructive actions. Eating could be one of them, he says. The action of teeth-crushing food is a destructive process, and we receive pleasure from that, or we become de-stressed. We release our anger by crunching down. Dr. Thomas Wadden, he is the former director of the Center for Weight and Eating. He says people who swallow their anger feel, for whatever reason, they can't express it, so they resort to food. Well, that, in a nutshell, is most emotional eating, right? You can't express it. Sometimes you can't even know it. Sometimes you don't even know you're upset. I'm not upset. What are you talking about? I'm just mad at myself because I ate chips. Oh, you're upset at something. All right. So he says, the irony is nobody enjoys eating when they're stuffing hostile feelings. And that is so true of the experience of emotional eating or binge eating. It feels compulsive and horrible. And you're either in the binge zone where you're not feeling anything, or you are just filled with self-recrimination at the time. Why can't I stop eating? What am I doing? This is horrible. What's wrong with me? You have this really awful narrative in your head as you are continuing to eat, rather than a curious narrative, which is, hey, what's going on with me? Why am I eating this? What's bothering me? Oh, I'm choosing chips. Maybe I'm angry. I'm choosing chips. That tells me I'm angry, some form of angry, whether I can recognize it or not. I must be frustrated or irritated. If I were not feeling that way towards myself, who or what would I be upset with? That's being curious, not critical. So when we come back from the break, we're going to look at the psychology of eating chips from a more personal perspective. And I'm going to tell you about Beth, not her real name, who came in and said, why can't I stop eating chips? What's wrong with me? So more about Beth's story when we're back from the break. I'll see you then. And if you're on Instagram, I will stay with you.
All clear. Back in 2.
Thanks, Jordan. So everyone on Instagram, any thoughts? Any questions? What surprises you the most over what I've been talking about today, if anything? All right, if you're just joining me on break from my show, I'll be back in about a minute and a half. Barbara. So I'm talking about the science of crunchy foods, the psychology behind crunchy foods. I'm going to come back and talk about some specific examples of people who couldn't stop eating chips and the like. So if anyone has any questions while we're on break, now's the time to answer. Now's the time to ask so I can answer either here or when we come back on air. If not, I don't know, drop a heart. Let me know you're here. Are you with me? No. Okay. All right, stay with me. We're going to be back from the break in just a little bit, talking about the psychology of eating. If you have any questions, please drop a question in the comment box, or if anything, you want to know anything about this topic. If you've just joined, I'm going to share a lot more when we come back. If you've been with me and you have a question or a comment about any of what I've shared, let me know. And if you want to see the whole episode,
about 10 seconds.
If you want to see the whole episode, it is available on all podcast channels. The Binge Cure with Dr. Nina.
Welcome back to the Binge Cure with Dr. Nina. Have questions for Dr. Nina? Join her on the show at 866-472-5792. That's 866-472-5792. Now back to the show.
Welcome back to the Binge Cure with Dr. Nina. Today we are talking about ways that you can stop being drawn to crunchy foods like chips. And we talked about some of the science behind why we are drawn to chips, and some of the psychology about, from an overall perspective, that which pertains to the most people. Like, why do we as humans choose to eat chips? And I gave you a lot of suggestions on things that you can do differently, and understanding why you might be drawn to potato chips, Doritos, pretzels, all the things. And now I want to share a more personal example of someone who came to me and she said, Dr. Nina, why can't I stop eating chips? Every day I tell myself I am not going to eat the chips. I'm not going to go to the store. I'm not going to buy the chips. Then I think, well, I'll just get some for my husband. And then she's like, the chips are gone the next day. Full family size bag. How can I stop eating chips? Oh my God. So here's Beth's story. Beth was preoccupied with losing the last 20 pounds that she had gained over, she was preoccupied with losing the 20 pounds, not the last 20 pounds. She'd gained 20 pounds over the last year. And what had happened was, ever since her youngest daughter had gone away to college, Beth could not stop eating Doritos. My favorite Doritos. All right. And she didn't understand why she didn't have more willpower. And she said, I am so blessed. I don't understand it. I have such a good life. She and her husband were in great shape financially. Their kids are all healthy and happy. She said, what's my problem? Why can't I stop eating chips? There's nothing going on in my life. I just have no willpower. And she had struggled with her weight on and off for much of her adult life. And she was at her lowest weight when she married Brian, her college boyfriend. And after he finished med school, she stayed home to raise their daughters, and he built a successful plastic surgery practice. So her weight was totally stable the whole time that she was bringing up her girls. She lost pregnancy weight. Everything was good. Things with food it was fine. She didn't really struggle. Sometimes she did, sometimes she didn't. But overall, everything was good. And she really loved being a stay-at-home mom. But now that she was an empty nester, she did not know what to do with herself. So she ate perfectly. Her word, I eat perfectly all day. She ate perfectly all day, a bowl of bran cereal with non-fat milk for breakfast, a salad with protein for lunch. It was all perfect. A dietitian would be so happy. Healthy dinner, fish, chicken, vegetables, whatever. She was super healthy. But at night, after dinner, she would start wandering into the kitchen, looking for something to eat, and soon totally losing control over chips. She said, she's so good all day. Why does she mess it up at night? She's like, I'm not even hungry. I can't stop eating. What's wrong with me? So during these nighttime excursions to the kitchen, she usually had potato chips or popcorn, Doritos, something with a crunch. And she was really ashamed to admit and reveal that she often would have a family-sized bag of chips in one sitting. And first she tried to find a physical reason for her cravings. She's like, I wonder if I just have a thing for salt. She never went for anything sweet. She said, you could put a bowl of ice cream in front of me and I would not be tempted in the least. So I told Beth that her food choices might give us some clues about what was going on with her emotionally. And when I suggested a connection between chips and anger, as per my food mood formula, for those of you who know it, she was very doubtful. She didn't think her overeating or binging on chips was linked to any kind of angry feelings, but she was willing to consider it as a possibility. But she was very skeptical. And a few sessions later, she reported, last night, my husband texted that he was running late, she said, even later than usual. She said she understands he's busy. There's a lot of demands on his time. It's always been that way, even since he was in med school. Always been busy. But right after she heard from him, right after she got the text, she went to the kitchen for chips. I said, well, it sounds like you have some feelings about him being late. And she's like, no, that's part of the deal. It comes with being a doctor's wife. And she said that even when her girls were little, Brian was never home before 7 or 8 o'clock. And she said she's always known this is how it is, and she can't do anything about it. And I said, well, just because you know something or can't change a situation doesn't mean you don't have feelings about it. And she said, well, wait, shouldn't she be able to make herself feel differently about things that she knew there was nothing she could do about? I know there's something I could do about it, so why do I feel this way? And I told her, hey, logic doesn't change how you feel. You cannot talk yourself out of or into feelings. It is impossible not to feel upset and then immediately feel differently. And I told her, it is not logical, which is what we know. It is psychological, which is what we feel. And our logic does not inform our feelings, right? So Beth really struggled with this concept, and she had always felt like a failure for not doing or feeling what she knew was best for her. And I was offering this totally new paradigm and one that was very difficult for her to accept. She just, her mind just couldn't wrap around it. But Beth was definitely using potato chips and Doritos and what have you, popcorn, to channel her anger. She was crunching violently to express her feelings and then later taking that anger out on herself for eating too much of this junky food. And the anger that she could not recognize or own that she felt about her situation or her husband choosing work over her was getting expressed anyway. It was just getting turned on her. I call it the boomerang effect. I'm really upset with that person because they are making me mad. No, I'm actually upset with myself. Look what I ate. Look what I weigh. Oh my God. So she had spent years denying her truth and then turning against herself for attacking herself for what she weighed or for eating what she'd considered the wrong thing or for overeating or for all the things. And so Beth slowly got in touch with some frustration, irritation, annoyance, yes, downright anger toward her husband. She finally admitted to herself how much she resented the fact that he prioritized work over spending time with the family. And when she was raising her girls, she had been so busy with all their activities, she didn't let herself think about how her husband was gone. And it was kind of like her and the girls and him, almost like they were living separate parallel lives. And now her girls were grown. Remember, her last daughter had left for college, and that's when she started gaining weight. That's when Beth started gaining weight. And now she was all alone in an empty house with her thoughts that she didn't want to think. And food was a distraction from her upset feelings, as well as a way of expressing them, right? She didn't want ice cream. She didn't need to be soothed. She didn't need, she wasn't eating cake. She was eating all crunchy foods. She was mad. She was resentful. She was angry. And she finally was getting in touch with it. And underlying her problem with food, as she thought it was actually a problem in her marriage, in her relationship. And once she became curious about what she was thinking, what she was feeling, what she needed, what she wanted, rather than be critical of herself or be mad at herself because she couldn't just feel okay with a situation she was not okay with, she could address the problems in her marriage. And guess what? She stopped eating chips. So it's really important to look at what's eating at you. What you are eating is not the problem, even though, yes, it sure feels like the problem. The problem is what's eating at you. Why are you eating? So in Beth's case, it was feeling resentful that she was, not a priority for her husband, and nor were her kids, and that he chose work, or so it seemed to her. He chose work over her, and that was really hurtful and upsetting. So what's eating at you? Anger, any feeling, is just a reaction to a situation. Deborah Cox and her colleagues studied women in anger, and they found 4 distinct ways that women suppress their angry feelings. They internalize their feelings, they blame themselves for what's happened, and they often direct their feelings towards others onto themselves instead. The boomerang effect, that was Beth. And another response is to externalize anger. And that means you get madder and madder and madder and madder until it's all too much, leading to an explosion of anger. I have shared here before about my college roommate who would borrow everything. She would borrow stuff from me. She borrowed my hair dryer, she borrowed my jeans, she borrowed my shirt, she borrowed my straightener, she borrowed whatever. And one day she reaches for my eraser and goes, "Oh, can I borrow that?" And I had the explosion of anger. I was like, "No, you cannot have that. You cannot borrow that. No." Like I just blew up. And she was like, "Oh my God, it's just an eraser." It wasn't just an eraser. It was all the things that she had borrowed and borrowed and borrowed and borrowed without asking me. And so finally, I had that explosion of anger. And then guilt usually follows those blowups, which reinforces the idea that anger is unacceptable and bad. And another anger style is containment, which means you hold it in, you're angry, but you hold it in, hoping that the feeling will pass, and it doesn't. And, you let it go. That's the explosion. And another category of anger is called segmentation, which means denying anger. That was Beth. She totally denied it. And according to Deborah Cox, women who deny feeling angry despite obvious provocation usually think that anger is a character flaw. Also, they've gotten so good at denying their emotions, they often don't realize they're angry, except they eat and then they turn all that anger on themselves. She didn't say that last part, I did. So recently, a friend was telling me about a really annoying experience she had with customer service. And I told her, "Wow, I can really relate to how mad you felt. Like I'm pissed off just hearing about it." And she goes like, "Oh, I'm not angry. I'm not pissed off. No, I'm just really frustrated." And so, like my friend, a lot of people think of anger as this huge explosion of emotion. And they don't realize that annoyance, frustration, irritation, resentment, all of those are forms of anger. So anger does not only refer to a huge explosion of emotion, frustration is a form of anger. Annoyance is a form of anger. Rage is a form of anger. All emotions exist on a continuum from benign to intense. And when we deny our anger, we never learn to gauge it and recognize the various degrees of anger, or whatever the various types of anger that we feel given any situation. And as a result, all feelings of anger can feel like too much. If you don't let yourself have any kind of anger, then a 2 on a scale of 1 to 10, if 10 is rage and 2 is annoyed, then 2 is going to feel like a 10. When we suppress all of our feelings, everything is going to feel too much. And like Beth, we may then be very comfortable being mad at ourselves for eating chips while ignoring our feelings about other people or situations. So a few years ago, Amy Schumer did a movie called I Feel Pretty. Anyone see it? Any Amy Schumer fans or ex-fans out there? I know she's a little controversial right now, but there is a poignant scene in I Feel Pretty in which she studies her reflection in a full-length mirror, and her face just registers this acute shame and sadness as she looks at her reflection. She is just encased in shapewear. And here's the thing. Why am I bringing up shame? Because shame and rage are often tied together. Shame means you think there's something wrong with you or your basic character. And shame is often confused with guilt, which is about something that you've done or haven't done. So guilt sounds like, oh, there's something wrong with what I did. I shouldn't have eaten the chips. But shame sounds like there's something wrong with me because I ate the chips. And when we feel shame, we often get very angry with ourselves. And then instead of yelling at someone else, getting mad at someone else, which I'm not advocating yelling, but we kind of yell at ourselves, don't we? We attack ourselves. Instead of expressing how we feel, hey, that thing that you did really upset me because it means this. Or I'm really, I'm feeling resentful right now because of this, and it means that. It becomes, I hate myself. What's wrong with me? Shame, 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 shame. So recognizing that shame-anger connection also helps us create change. Because if you feel shame and then you get angry, the reverse can happen. When you feel angry, you could also feel shame. So recognizing the two often go together and trying to separate them, anger is just a reaction to a situation. Shame is a feeling that there's something wrong with you. Really important to separate those two things. And here's why shame is so destructive. A sociologist and professor at UC Santa Barbara, Thomas Sheff, says shame is, quote, the most obstructed and hidden emotion, and therefore the most destructive. Emotions are like breathing. They only cause trouble when obstructed. Isn't that great? When we don't let them out, that's when we're in trouble, or when we divert them and turn them into something else. Brené Brown, who is known for her research into vulnerability, she describes shame as the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. And her research shows that the primary shame trigger for women is their physical appearance, and for men, it's the fear of being perceived as weak. So if you can relate to those feelings, think about how you would respond to someone who felt terrible about her appearance. Would you shame them? Would you say, God, you know what? You have gained weight and I don't like you as much anymore? Or would you not even think that? Would that never even occur to you? But then why do you do it towards yourself? Would you offer your understanding and support? Probably yes. And when you treat yourself as you would a friend, you feel better about yourself without having to be perfect. Self-love is the ultimate antidote to shame. Because remember, nobody has a perfect body, not the models who are airbrushed and photoshopped, not anyone. And what you do is not who you are. If you make a mistake, if you eat the bag of chips, that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. If you make a mistake, you're not a mistake. So normalize the fact that we're all perfectly imperfect. We all make mistakes. We all have failures in judgment. We all do things we later regret. And when we normalize and acknowledge our imperfections, they no longer have so much power over us, and we will be less angry with ourselves and more at peace. And when we are less angry with ourselves, guess what? You're not going to use food, particularly crunchy foods, to express that anger and then to turn it on yourself. You're not going to weaponize it, and turn it on you. So as you can see, as I've talked about today, and I do have more, probably get to it next week. When you normalize what's going on inside, in addition to the science part that I shared earlier. But when you're more curious and not critical, when you take your feelings seriously, when you express them in an appropriate way instead of stuffing them and getting mad at yourself. So many people I know say, I would never get mad at anyone else. That's not nice. But why are you mad at yourself? Well, because I ate the chips, right? How about you are as much deserving of the compassion you show for others as anyone else? How about showing that for you? What a concept. Because, if you're upset, it's for a reason. You are not an angry person. You are a person who is angry. And that deserves your attention, not your condemnation. Okay, that is it for today's show on how to stop eating crunchy foods. I'm going to be back next week talking about a little bit more about this. So please be sure to join me then. I'm on Voice America and live streaming on Instagram every Thursday at noon Pacific time, 3 p.m. Eastern time. And if you want a deeper dive into this topic, please grab your copy of my best-selling book, The Binge Cure, 7 Steps to Outsmart Emotional Eating. It will change your life. And that's just not me saying that. That's one of the people who left a review. It will change your life. And I also have, of course, the accompanying workbook, a guided journal that will help you implement the things that I talk about in the book and on this show. So have a very good Memorial Day holiday weekend. Stay curious, not critical. I'll see you next week. Bye for now.
All clear. Great show.
Thank you, Jordan. Have an amazing week, and I'll see you next week.
You too. Hope you enjoy your weekend. Hopefully your work day is not too crazy.
I will. I kind of like the craziness though, so I'm really not complaining. All right. Bye. Bye for now.
Yeah, take care.
Bye.